My work has been to study artists, as was mentioned, and how artists, what they do and how they think can be applied in other areas. And so today I want to focus on not so much that, but something that the artists face when they come to meet communities. And we've been talking all day about the power of community, its cohesion. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how that can get us into trouble. So I'm going to take a little different direction with that. And I'm going to tell you a story about that, which is a challenge to both the community and the person. So I'm going to talk about innovators and communities and the relationship that they sometimes struggle with. And I'm going to talk about a story which some of you may have known. It was well written about when it happened, and it's still talked about today because it had such an impact on the industry, and that is a fire that took place in Montana, in Man Gulch, quite a while ago, 1949, quite a while before I was born, actually. So we're going to go back low tech and talk a little bit about a different subject. So one of the things that happens with communities and innovators is that communities, as they grow, as they become coherent, as they pull together, they become powerful because they see things the same way. And that's what holds people together. And innovators, because of their singular nature, see things differently. It's just a fundamental difference between people who are trying to share and people who are trying to create something new. And this difference gets aggravated by the fact that innovations themselves always happen out of sync. They are by definition ahead of their time. They're unpredictable. We don't know what to do with them when we see them, and they are inherently difficult to judge. The virtue of any particular innovation is hard to judge until you've tried it. And so communities often fear what they can't understand. And so they will sometimes, more often than we would like, round up the wagons and say, this is what we believe, and we're too worried about that new idea to even give it a try. And unfortunately, in the space that occurs between innovators, history shows us that bad things can happen, and at least temporarily, good things are lost. And they are lost often at a time when they're needed most. And so this is going to be not a happy story that I'm going to talk to you, but it's a cautionary story so that we raise our awareness about this issue, and we can meet it head on and predict that it's going to happen, because it happens over and over and over again throughout history. So the story I'm going to tell you, the crew in this group, or the community in this group, is a very heroic bunch of young men. They're all 17 to 22. They're firefighters, and they called themselves smoke jumpers. They were the first firemen to actually leap out of the sky, out of a propeller-driven plane with a parachute, and they would jump into these remote areas to fight these big forest fires face to face. And they were a courageous, elite group that were held together. They didn't always know each other one-to-one, but they were held together by this notion of who they were and the courage that it took to do what they did. They went there with just the water and food they could carry for a day. They had picks, they had shovels, and they worked on the line to stop these fires. And so they shared a code of conduct, and they were as closely knit as anyone can be. I know there's someone else here who's been in the military, and I've heard the same kind of story from elite type groups, sports groups, military groups that have, their lives depend on each other. And so they had a code of conduct, and the one code that's most important here to remember for this story is that they knew if the fire came toward them, they could find safety on the top of a ridge. There's a natural break at the top of a ridge. The innovator of this story, his name was Wag Dodge, fabulous name, and he was older, more experienced. He could do everything these kids could do, and he could do it better. They knew that about him. He had a great reputation, but he was also a reticent man, a quiet man. He was a creative person, an artisan. He took care of everything in the base camps, but he wasn't of them. And so the day that they went out to fight this fire, it was in the hills of Montana. He was their foreman, but they didn't know him personally, and it was the first time he had actually led them anywhere. When they went out to meet this fire, they left in the afternoon, and they were on the ground fighting by 5 o'clock, and we know because they found a watch that was melted that the fire confronted them at 59 minutes later, at 5:59. So this all happened in a very short period of time. It was very urgent, but it's the same dynamic you'll see between communities and innovators, basically around the world. The time doesn't seem to matter in my research, whether it's slow or fast. It's the certainty with which we hold our views that seems to make a difference. So when they saw this fire, they saw two different things. The group, the kids, they were really kids, I think. They called themselves an outfit, so they had an identity in that way. They saw a fire that they felt they could conquer, they could tame. They called these fires 10 o'clock fires, and they laughed about them, and they said, we can fight these fires all night. We can be done by breakfast. We can go home and have lunch at the base. But Wag Dodge, he had more experience. He saw something different. He saw a fire that was about to get big, that was about to explode, that was about to get out of control. And he walked them, instead of where they normally would go, he tried to move them down toward the river. This all took place in a gulch, where the river ran through the center of it, where they could actually fight the fire within relative safety. And they could get, if they had to, out through the river. Unfortunately, the wind was so gusty that the grass burst into flame between them and the river. And so this put them all in peril. And he told them to run, drop your stuff and run for your lives. But they were at the bottom of a deep gulch, and they had to run up a hill. And the fire at this point, because of the massive wind, was moving at 100 yards a minute, I think was the time estimate. So these people were in peril. And he was able to at least help them. He called to them and said, drop your tools, you need to run. But they were running at that point, which he could see, a race they were not going to win. So in the face of this, he did something at that time that no one had ever done before, no one had conceived of. He took a pack of matches out of his pocket. He turned toward the fire. He lit a fire at his feet. He invented what they call an escape fire. And it's something that every forest firefighter has been educated in today and has saved many, many lives since he invented it. And he stopped and he called his men and he said to them, step with me into this fire. Now they were running, as their code predicted, as a group. There were 15 of them, and they were running for the ridge because that was the knowledge that they could rely on. Now it's a well-told story. At that point, he took his canteen out. He rinsed his handkerchief with water. He put it over his face. He knelt in the ashes, and he lay down in the ashes of the fire he had burned. And the fire burned over him. 2 other firefighters made it because they found a lucky outcropping of stone, and the fire caught the rest of the men. Now, it's a very sad story, and I don't tell it to make us feel sad, but this urgency of communication between innovator and community is one that breaks down all the time. And if you look throughout history, we can see it happen over and over again, and it's something worth preparing for. I mean, we can all imagine what happened. History tells us what happened. The first time someone said, the world is round and it's not flat. And the first time someone said microscopic things are responsible for disease. Or the first time someone said vehicles can go underwater through the sky and into space. Or the first time someone said a computer could fit in our pocket. Or the first time Lady Gaga said, I'm going to be a rock and star idol. I think we exported her back to Europe. Whenever communities come together, they believe deeply, and their identity is preserved by them holding on to their beliefs. And innovators need to understand that when they are calling people to come with them to a new idea, they're inviting them into an unproven fire. They don't know, no one here knows if someone says, I have the greatest idea in the world, if it's going to work or if it's going to be a disaster until after it happens. And so I think in every community, we have to design mechanisms that allow us to be open to the ideas we haven't yet anticipated. And as innovators, we have to find better ways to say we have to have the relationship that will allow communities to say, what do you have, and here's what I have to show you, so that what's possible can be explored by both communities and by the innovators that have the great ideas. So I want you to take a minute. I know that was an intense story, but I want you to think about, as we've all been doing today throughout the day in your own lives, times when you were a member of a community or you're going to be an innovator because you're all the kind of people you are. Both things are going to be true. You're going to be in communities that you're working hard to build, and you're going to be creative innovators that have ideas that people around you will not understand. And so the question that we all need to answer for ourselves, and it's a different answer for everyone. Could give you a list of 5 things, but it's more personal than that, I think. That what's one thing you can do if you're a member of a community to see what's possible in the things you don't yet understand? That makes communities more global rather than more local, but I think that's probably a good thing. And you as innovators, when you take the role of innovator and you're the one who's going to say this is possible, find a way to share what's possible and what you see differently more effectively. And I do believe, even though I had a difficult story to tell, that the way we do that, the way we forward, if we can do that, then, as we've all talked about today, all the really great things that can happen. And then all the great opportunities will be found rather than lost. Thank you.